This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. A recent report from the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center, it reveals black veterans are more likely to leave the military with other than honorable discharge status, and that prevents access to VA benefits. Today on Where We Live, we discuss these disparities and how they're being addressed where we live. Plus, a Marine veteran from Hamden is suing the VA, alleging racial discrimination. Mr. Conley Monk Jr. will join us today. Veterans, we want to hear from you. Please give us a call at 1-888-720-WNPR or go to 888-720-9677. Conley Monk Jr. came home to Hamden in 1970 after serving in the Vietnam War. He didn't leave on his own terms. He was discharged after an altercation in Okinawa brought on by PTSD, an incident that was categorized within the military as other than honorable. Mr. Monk spent decades trying to access basic benefits like disability coverage until this appeal with the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims in 2015. It ultimately changed how these kinds of cases are heard, formally allowing class action lawsuits. Coming up, Mr. Monk is going to join us along with his representation at Yale Law School's Veterans Legal Services Clinic. We'll discuss the new lawsuit they've filed against the VA alleging racial discrimination. While the VA has not responded to the suit directly, as the music will hopefully subside in my head, I'm getting distracted here today. Look at me, I'm unfurling here before your very eyes. While the VA has not responded to the suit directly, Press Secretary Terrence Hayes, he says in a written statement emailed the Connecticut Public that the agency is working to address institutional racism and to review some policies. Hayes says that throughout history, they've been unacceptable disparities in both VA benefits, decisions, and military status due to racism, which have wrongly left black veterans without access to VA care and benefits. We're actively working to right these wrongs. That's what the VA says. And joining us now to discuss what's happening is Conley Monk Jr., a Marine veteran and founder of the National Veterans Council for Legal Redress. Good morning, Mr. Monk. Thank you so much for coming on.
Good morning.
And thank you for your service.
And I thank you for acknowledging it.
And we also have just on the line right now Michael Sullivan. He's a student intern at Yale Law School's Veteran Legal Services Clinic. Good morning, Michael.
Hey, good morning.
We have Michael on in case Mr. Monk and I are having an intense conversation and we need somebody to help us with some legal terms or something like that. If there's something that we missed or anything like that, he might close the loop on it. For the folks that are listening at home or on the go, you can join the conversation 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. Mr. Monk, can you just give us an idea of an other than honorable discharge status and how that's something that you didn't deserve at that time and the efforts to kind of rectify that over the years?
Yes. Let me say that I didn't deserve it. I served in Vietnam honorably. You know, I fought and did what was required of me. I did yield to the call of my country. I didn't evade it, and what the less than honorable veteran discharge does to a veteran, it prohibits us from receiving our medical benefits. It prohibits us from receiving our educational benefits. It stopped me from going back to get my job that I had before I went in the military. I was working at the VA hospital, and I thought that I would come back home and go right back into my job. But it prohibited me from getting my job back. It stopped my family from benefiting from it. I couldn't get the homeowner's loan. My kids couldn't get the school. They should have been able, with the disability that I had from my service, they should have been able to receive educational benefits themselves and other benefits, which all that was stopped because of the less than honorable discharge.
Why is this fight so important? It's not like it's just like a fight that you've had for a couple of years or something like that, or you've had to try to claw back these benefits over a short period of time. This is happening over 50 years.
Well, this fight continues because not only am I affected by it, there's thousands of other Black veterans that also is undergoing the same type of problems that I'm encountering. There was thousands of vets that came back with bad discharges from the Vietnam War, which should have never happened. When I came home in the 1970, I was fighting for amnesty at that time because I knew I was wrongfully discharged with a bad discharge. So, I felt amnesty was appropriate. I was involved in other veterans organizations fighting for amnesty. Matter of fact, I was involved with the Mothers for Amnesty that was fighting for their sons to come back that was the draft evaders. And I most definitely knew that the Vietnam vets was entitled to the amnesty before the draft evaders.
It wasn't, I talk about 50 years, something like that. It took 45 years, this appeal that Mr. Monk began to receive disability compensation after 45 years. But obviously the fight continues because it's just the disability compensation that happened at that point. And only in 2020 did the VA recognize that he should have been eligible for benefits since his initial application some 49 years earlier. So, Mr. Monk, this suit is based on records obtained through FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, showing a statistically significant difference in benefits claims outcomes between Black and white veterans. What are these findings, and how does your experience kind of run parallel to what is seen in the numbers?
Well, my attorney can speak on that, but in terms of the numbers, how many Black veterans it was indifferent from the white veterans. And the white veterans was able to get their disability claims at a higher percentage than Black veterans. And also, my understanding is they was even getting paid more than what the Black veterans was getting paid. There was a lot that went on there that should have never happened. We fought in the same military service. We served the same country. We fought in the same war. We should have been receiving the same benefits and the same, pay, but that wasn't the case.
Michael, we talked about the legal aspect of this, and I think Mr. Monk deferred to you on that. Anything you want to say in regards to in regards to that lawsuit and Conley's experience, perhaps sort of running parallel to that?
Absolutely, and this touches on some of the different pillars that we're hoping to address with this lawsuit. One of which is, of course, redressing the discrimination that Mr. Monk was subjected to while trying to obtain his benefits at the VA. But what's really interesting is the data that was obtained through these FOIA requests shows that, at least for the last 2 decades, every single year there was a higher chance that a white veteran would receive their disability compensation and a higher chance that a Black veteran would not. And that goes on until 2020, which seems to indicate that if a Black veteran who enlisted in the military in 2018 were to have left and gone to the VA this week, they would be at a higher chance of having their disability claim denied, seemingly on the basis of race. And so with this lawsuit, we're also hoping to shed some more light on those practices and lead to their cessation. And then a third pillar is this is a very novel lawsuit. As far as we're aware, we haven't seen any other use of a Federal Tort Claim Act lawsuit for racial reparations. And so we're hoping to lay the legal groundwork that other Black veterans can pursue legal redress through this manner.
That's Michael Sullivan. He's a student intern at Yale Law School's Veterans Legal Services Clinic, and he's on the phone, and he's saying that essentially this information that they got was over a 20-year period from 2000 to 2020. These Freedom of Information Act numbers that they got through a Freedom of Information Act request, saying that year over year, it's white people that are more likely to get these benefits, white veterans that are more likely to get these benefits over black veterans. Mr. Monk, I want to go back to you here. The VA says they're actively working to right these wrongs and talking about how historically the benefits claims process and decisions haven't benefited black veterans. How would you say that? Do you feel comfortable answering that? Do you feel like do you feel like they're actively working to right the wrongs? What's your thought on that?
Well, I would have thought that they would have been working to right the wrong. This goes back further than me. It goes back to my father, which was a World War II vet who served in Normandy, fought, honorably in Normandy, and came home and put in a disability claim in 1942 and was denied. And, if it was a white vet, I would say that they would have been approved versus, the black veterans. Now I understood some of that went on back then, but now up in this time era, shouldn't happen. It should never happen, and it continued until just recently. So the proof is in the pudding, in the action, and them showing us, until I see that they have made a change, a difference, I don't believe it.
Mr. Monk, you went back on against the VA over your father, or at least you've been trying to claw back some benefits for your father as well, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yes,
or at least some recognition?
Correct.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, that is correct. My whole family, my siblings, we all were scarred and prohibited from receiving what we should have been entitled to. My father, he showed that, there was not only him, there was other black veterans that underwent the same discrimination and, non-recognition for their service, their honorable service. And what it did, it carried over to me, to my siblings, that, we should have been able to receive educational benefits coming through my father's disability. But once again, I'll believe it once I see it happen, because what I'm fighting for is not only me. I'm leading the charge for other black veterans, for other veterans. I want to see them, benefit from it, and their families benefit from it. And I would like to see this stop. This shouldn't carry on any further.
Mr. Monk, I don't know when you were apprised of the numbers at what point, but when these numbers over 20 years come in, I understand that that this is why you follow a lawsuit. You know that there's some disparities. That's something that you believe in. But what was your reaction when you actually see the numbers in front of you? Did you think it was even more profound than you thought? What were your thoughts?
Well, I always knew that it was indifference. I mean, there was a difference between the way the black veterans was treated versus the white veterans. But when I seen the numbers, it confirmed it, that there's been an injustice that's been going on for years. And I pray that, we did come to an end to this, injustice.
I want to talk to you about the National Veterans Council for Legal Redress. That's a nonprofit veteran service organization that works to secure benefits for veterans and their families. Data requested by the Veterans Council and the Black Veterans Project shows up in the lawsuit. How's this sort of emblematic of what your organization is supposed to do for veterans?
Well, when I came home from Vietnam, I knew that, I had to get involved in starting something to fight back. and starting the National Veterans Council. First of all, when I started the organization in the, I came up with the idea in the 70s when I came back from Vietnam in 1970. But we started it with the undesirables. That was the name of our organization because I was trying to draw all the undesirable veterans out of the woodwork. And that we was very effective in doing that. So I changed the name to the National Veterans Council for Legal Redress. And, we knew that we needed to get to put a positive light on our organization. I knew that I had to do some positive things. Like, for instance, we came up with the idea of building a monument for the Vietnam vets because the government wasn't doing it, and we was looked upon as rapists and rapists and baby killers and everything else when we came back from Vietnam. So I started and the organization. I thought that in starting the monument, I came up with the idea, and we raised $250,000 to have that monument built. I got involved in building a committee that was compiled of the mothers, fathers, and family members of the deceased veterans. And they was on that committee, and we was very effective. We got the city of New Haven to initiate giving us the money towards the monument. And what I came up with the idea of 7 surrounding cities, the havens, to also do the same thing that New Haven did. And they did that. And we were successful in building our monument in 1980.
There's a statue memorializing deceased Vietnam veterans that's in New Haven that Mr. Monk is talking about. His organization, Conley Monk Jr., worked very hard to get that up. And I understand you want another one for the living as well, or at least several more.
That's correct. Well, what had happened was we had promised the veterans that we was going to put up a living monument for the living Vietnam vets, but I had got sick, and I could not continue. And when I stopped, the project stopped. So. We had a model of a wall going around the V. We was going to build a 4-foot wall with the names of all the living Vietnam vets on it, and the big V. Let me tell you, this V is 11 feet tall. It's somewhat in harmony with the one in Washington, D.C. It's a V. And it's anchored 11 feet in the ground, and it's estimated to be up for 2,000 years. And if you look through it, look straight through it, it's supposed to take you straight back to Vietnam. So it was the gateway into New England. You had to ride by our monument, going to Hartford or into New England. So.
A lasting legacy, and hopefully something that can help you put behind or honor at least these 50 years that you've had to fight on behalf of your service record and on behalf of the service records of many other service members.
Yes. And, we done changed the idea of the design of the monument now. We want to call it the Pier Project and have a reflection of the V. We're going to have a V going out into the water. So that's the reason why we call it the Pier Project. We're in the process of trying to get a model made, and we have the architectures at Yale that's going to be the ones that help us design this.
I don't want to gloss over this because you said earlier that you got sick. I understand that you had diabetes at some point throughout this process, and maybe even suffered a stroke. Like you're going through a lot personally as you're trying to continue this fight. Can you just tell me about how you're doing? How are you, Conley? I just want to make sure I'm checking in on you to see how you're doing.
I've been truly blessed, and I thank God because I'm 74 years of age. And, years ago it was estimated that most of the Vietnam vets that was exposed to Agent Orange would be real sick with some form of cancers, or either they might even been expired. So I've been blessed. I did contract diabetes, which they saying that it could have came from Agent Orange. I am 50% disability, received this 50% disability for Agent Orange. I receive 100% for PTSD because I had a lot of problems over the years and didn't have any help from the VA. I couldn't go to the VA and get any kind of services because of my discharge. So I had to, with the blessings of my family, I had to fight this fight on my own. I had to work 2 full-time jobs in order to get what I needed and in order to get any type of home, saving my money. And I couldn't get the home loan from the VA. So I was excluded from everything. But I've been doing good. I have not only diabetes, I have I had a stroke, a major stroke, where I couldn't I was declared legally blind. I couldn't walk for so far. And then I had to seem like I had to sit and rest. I also have cirrhosis of the liver, they say. I have a series of medical problems that could have been related to my military service. Of course, I'm a Marine, so I served in Camp Lejeune. I could have been contaminated by the water pollution in Camp Lejeune. So I have a series of medical problems that's related to my military service.
Mr. Monk, it would be hard for me to say that I'm not happy to that I wouldn't be happy to see you here to make it to 74 and see through all the fight that you've done here. Very, very happy to be talking to you here this morning.
Yes.
And thank you to Michael. And thank you to Michael Sullivan as well for joining us. I really appreciate you both coming on this morning here on Where We Live.
And
thank you for having me.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mike. I just wanted to my final statement is to say that I've been blessed with having Yale Law School, and Michael, you're truly a blessing to me and the other students. So I thank God for you.
Coming up,
Michael, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, not at all.
Thank you both for coming on very much. I appreciate it. And coming up, we're going to have a new report from the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center showing us how racial disparities play out among veterans leaving the military. The lead authors are going to join us. Veterans and their loved ones, we want to hear from you. Call us at 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. There's a new report out there from the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center showing how racial disparities play out among veterans leaving the military. Across 4 out of the 5 military branches, roughly 1 million separation documents they obtained. Black service members were approximately 1.5 times as likely as the white service members to receive an other than honorable discharge rather than honorable discharge, and approximately twice as likely as the white service members to receive what's called a general discharge. Joining me now to discuss, I have Alden Pinkham. She's on Zoom, joining us from the Connecticut Bar Association and the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center. Good morning, Alden.
Good morning, Frankie. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it very much. I do want to invite people to talk to us this morning. They can call us 888-720-9677, 888-720-WNPR. If they want to speak about veterans and benefits more generally, they can call us in. Alden, you got to hear from Conley Monk. You get to talk to Mr. Monk a lot, I'm sure. What's it like hearing him talk about what he's gone through in his service career?
Oh, yes. Mr. Monk's story, he should really be commended for sharing this. His experiences are very hard for veterans to speak about even decades later. And it's really veterans like Conley, like other Black veterans in Connecticut who have come to us and talked to us about their experiences in military service that made us realize the need for this report to understand what is really happening when it comes to race and military separations.
I just want to say that we're talking about military separations. We're talking about these less than honorable discharges, or how they characterize it, bad paper, things like that. And if we want to go even further, in the statement, the VA talks about institutional racism. I mean, this is not like just an isolated thing that happened in Vietnam. It's just want to make sure that we as Connecticut Public, we've always tried to cover this. Like, this has long existed. Google atomic veterans, something that Diane Orson covered a while back about veterans that had to go to testing that they had for atomic bombs and things like that. Why is this work so important, Alden?
It's so important because we have these 2 major institutions in our society. The military branches, where people pledge their service with the understanding that they might not come home, but with the understanding that if they give their service to their country, they're going to have future opportunities for a better life. And that includes the promises of this other institution, the VA, to provide their health care, to compensate them if they can't work due to a disability, to provide help purchasing a home, with education, all of these promises that these institutions provide. And we, the American public, benefit from the military service of all of those who volunteer and who serve. But the separation system that we have judges people on the way out. And those judgments then cut them off from all of those promises we made when we signed them up to serve to begin with.
Yeah, so, I want to get into some of that terminology. You're talking about administrative separation. What are the differences in discharge status? Honorable, general, other than honorable, bad conduct, dishonorable. And what do we mean when we say bad paper?
Yes. So Conley spoke at length about the VA system, and I'm here going to be talking about the Department of Defense. So different system, and the way in which military service members leave the service. So when someone leaves the service, they get a paper, the DD-214, and on that paper lists their characterization of service. Basically, it's a judgment of how well you served your country. And this is a little bit nuanced, but I'll break it down into the 5 most commonly used characterizations of service. There's honorable, which we all hear about, and that is the basic standard. And when someone receives an honorable discharge, they're eligible for all of the benefits and services the VA has to offer. They have to qualify for each individual benefit and service, but they're eligible to apply for them. The next level down is a general discharge, which is not quite as good as an honorable. You get access to most VA benefits and services, healthcare, disability compensation, pension, home loans, but not education benefits under the GI Bill. Then there's something called an other than honorable discharge, which is what Mr. Monk received. In older times, it was also called an undesirable. And this discharge, the VA considers you not to be a veteran if you have this discharge. Now, there is a process where you can go to the VA and try to convince them that under the circumstances of your particular story, they should consider you to be a veteran. But at baseline, VA presumes you're not a veteran and not eligible for anything. And then there are two further.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you. I apologize.
I know, it gets complex. Bad conduct and dishonorable, these are punitive discharges. They're punishments. A veteran will only receive those if they were found guilty at a trial. What makes the other than honorable discharge unique is that it's an administrative separation. It is essentially a discharge that has massive future consequences for the veteran, but very little due process. It's essentially at the whim of their supervisors.
Listeners can find the full report that we're talking about here on our website at ctpublic.org, where we live. And we just talked about general and other than honorable, but there's this really handy flow chart on page 14 of that report, if you go to ctpublic.org/where we live, showing direct impact discharge status having on VA benefits. Can you explain how did difference in status result in barriers to access after discharge?
Yes, it all comes down to how we define a veteran. So somebody can get VA services if they're a veteran. And you would think that that would just be anybody who served. I think it should be anybody who served. But the law states, so the law passed by Congress, that a veteran can receive benefits. A veteran is someone who was discharged under conditions, quote, other than dishonorable. Now, you could interpret that to mean that everybody except people with a capital D dishonorable discharge qualify for VA benefits. And if you look at the legislative history of this statute, there's every reason to think that that's what Congress had in mind. However, the VA has interpreted this law differently. They've interpreted it to say, we get to decide if somebody doesn't have an honorable or a general discharge, whether you served under conditions that were dishonorable or other than dishonorable. And what that means by and large is that anyone with an other than honorable discharge, if they go to the VA first looks at their record to determine what they think about that person's service. And unfortunately, a person's military record only tells one side of the story. It tells the military side of the story. Veterans have a right to ask for a hearing. They have a right to have representation in these proceedings. That can make a difference in final outcome. But the result is most veterans with an other than honorable discharge are denied by the VA, don't have full access to benefits. And the few that make it through the system, like Mr. Monk, their benefits are deferred for years and years and years, in which they're not getting treatment or compensation for disabilities or the services that they need to come back into the civilian world.
We've asked for phone calls into 888-720-WNPR, and we're going to hear from a veteran here. Z from Groton is going to share his experience of discrimination in military training. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for your service, Z.
Hello, thank you very much.
What's on your mind this morning?
So I just wanted to confirm that the UCMJ and the NJPs is definitely higher for Black military members, and also the struggle to attain benefits for the same exact service and same exact injuries. But I also wanted to touch on the the suspension rate, the fail rate, the kick-out rate that Blacks undergo in training that comes after boot camp. So this training is called AIT, Advanced Individual Training, or A school in the Navy. It's the kind of internship you do before you go to your military job. And you'll see, and it's known, everyone talks about it, that Black service members are kind of kicked out, failed, and moved to less desirable jobs for the same academic performance at these schools. And I wanted to point that out and add that to the conversation as well.
Thank you for joining us this morning, Z. I appreciate that. Alden, anything you want to say in response to what we heard from Z?
Yes, I think Z is absolutely right. So he mentioned non-judicial punishments and JPs, which we know are inflicted on service members of color at higher rates. There's a separate study on that, 2017 study from an organization called Protect Our Defenders. And then the failure rates in, during basic training and then in A school afterwards, we have not covered this in our study. And I think it's very much something that the military should start looking into. To my knowledge, the only branch of the military that's really beginning to look into how implicit bias and potentially explicit bias is operating is the Air Force. So they've begun to look through things like job assignments, promotion rates, separations for airmen of color. The other services, it's very overdue that they follow suit and understand what's going on in their branches.
I want to follow up with you more on what we're talking about here and the report, but first we're going to take a break. Alden Pinkham with the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center. I want you to stay with us here. Coming up, we'll be joined by your colleague, Chelsea Donaldson, about her work to connect veterans with benefits, even if they have a bad paper discharge. Coming up, thank you so much listening to Where We Live right now. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter if you want to participate at Where We Live, and stay tuned after the break. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. In a second, we're going to dig into a new report with Chelsea Donaldson and Alden Pinkham from the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center. Also, Alden is also from the Connecticut Bar Foundation. But just before we get into that, I want to take a phone call from a listener here. Edward from Manchester. Can you tell us about your father and his service, please?
Hi. My father served in the Army in the late 70s to early 80s. And he recently passed from COVID. My father was a very sickly person. He was probably the healthiest person I ever met. He was below retirement age, and but he had COVID, and when he was in the service, he didn't. I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep it together here. I'm thinking about my dad.
Take your time.
While he was in the service, he was on base. He lived on base, and his wife at the time was with another man, and he walked in on that, and he had a mental, breakdown. So he left. They considered him AWOL. They brought him back, and from what I understand, they released him as discharged, dishonorable, other than, and he wasn't able to get a military funeral. He wasn't able to go to the VA, and I've always felt that had he had the ability to have the VA available to him, he would have utilized those services and not feel like he was able to handle COVID on his own. He thought he could muscle through it like it was just a flu. And well, then here we are. So now I'm handling his estate by myself.
Edward, I'm so sorry to hear about your father, because I could hear it in your voice how you're impacted by that, and the other than honorable discharge there, not allowing you to have the military burial. I'm so sorry to hear about your loss, Edward.
Thank you very much.
You take care today, and I'm going to bring back in now on the phone right now Chelsea Donaldson. Excuse me, they're actually on Zoom. Chelsea Donaldson and Alden Pinkham. Chelsea Donaldson, supervising attorney of the Veterans Benefits Unit at the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center. I want to make sure I read your title on here this morning, Chelsea. And still with us, Alden Pinkham, the Connecticut Bar Association Singer Fellow and Connecticut Veterans Legal Center. Chelsea, you're helping these veterans access benefits through the VA with bad paper or an other than honorable discharge. How do you do that? How long does that take generally?
So two different questions. So
sure.
How do you do that? So if you have bad paper, and other than honorable discharge, or really anything other than an honorable or general on your DD-214, like Alden said earlier, the VA presumes you to not be a veteran. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are precluded forever from VA services. VA does have a mechanism that allows them to evaluate your service to determine if it is honorable for VA purposes. And what that means is that it does not change your DD-214. Your DD-214 will remain the same, but it's sort of like asking VA, okay, I understand that my DD-214 says this, but if you hear me out and you hear the context about why this happened, you will understand that if this did not happen, I should have gotten an honorable discharge and I should not be barred from services from VA because of it. So in this process, you essentially have to file for a benefit at VA. It could be an application for healthcare. It could be an application for service connection. It could be an application for educational benefits or a home loan. Any benefit at VA will trigger this process. And in this process, a veteran actually has quite a lot of rights. You have the right to a hearing. You have the right to put on evidence on your behalf. You have quite a lot of evidence of rights to put on evidence to show VA that you should have access to VA. So there is a mechanism in place to help correct, I guess what would be the word, any mistakes that DOD might have made on the back end to block people from access to VA. Now, all of that sounds great. And it sounds like a great system that should work perfectly. But the reality is that it does not. And to lead into your second question, Frankie, this process can take years. VA right now is exceptionally backlogged. There is a massive backlog from the pandemic that they are still working through. So, VA has not really given ETAs on their aims to end that or how quickly these claims are supposed to go. But even if the initial process goes quickly and you get a decision in 6 months from filing, what if it gets denied? Then you're in the appeal process. And so I have veterans that I have been representing since day one of my job at CVLC that I am still trying to get full access to VA with because the appeals process can take so long. So there is a system in place to help these folks, but it is clearly not perfect.
And I think, too, that's the importance of talking to Conley Monk Jr. because you kind of understand what it takes to overturn this or make an appeal or something like that. I just want to remind you both that, unfortunately, I'm running up against the clock here. I only got a few minutes left, so hopefully we can get through a couple of these next questions quite quickly. But this first one I want to ask you is very sensitive and very important as well. Some of what we're going to talk about here, it may not be suitable for all listeners, but I've spoken to some of the center's clients over the years, and they talk to me about needing help for mental health issues, experiences of military sexual assault, Why are those experiences, Chelsea, so common for your clients?
Unfortunately, the military has quite the epidemic of sexual assault in their ranks. And that problem is only getting worse. DOD, has released reports of their numbers in terms of reporting, in terms of the sheer number of people that are sexually assaulted in the service. And that number is only getting higher. So unfortunately, it is very common for veterans who come to CVLC for help, particularly those who also have the double whammy of having bad paper, that they have experienced some form of trauma in the service. For the first 2-ish years of my work at CVLC, my entire caseload was military sexual trauma cases. And I think that speaks to the breadth of the problem. That if an organization needs to hire somebody to only handle these cases, that means there's a lot of people out there that have this problem, right? And, experiencing trauma, and it's not just sexual assault either. I think, Alden and her work on this racial disparities report that we have released shows that trauma comes in many forms. And the trauma of racial harassment, racial-based hazing, racial-based assault, in addition to sexual assault, in addition to experiencing combat, being in the military can be a very traumatizing experience. And when you put somebody who has experienced this egregious trauma in a place where they don't have adequate access to mental health treatment, their trauma often manifests in what we would look at as misconduct. These NJPs start racking up. They go AWOL because they've experienced a traumatic event. The gentleman that just called in, his dad didn't have help. And the only way he could deal with what had happened to him is that he left. That's a very common experience for quite a lot of people.
Alden, we got about a less than about 30 to a minute here. So very quickly, I just got to hear why Chelsea does what she does. Why do you do this work?
I do this work because I believe that we should take care of people. We have the VA is an incredible system. It provides very good healthcare, great benefits, but it shuts out people. It shuts out people who experience mental illness. It shuts out people who experience military sexual trauma. And it shuts out people who have experienced discrimination on the basis of race and other factors as well. And I do that work to try to make those institutions align with our values.
Chelsea Donaldson, Alden Pinkham with the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center. Thank you guys so much for the work you do. It's been such a pleasure to work with the Connecticut Veterans Legal Center over the years to talk about these stories.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This has been Where We Live. I'm Frankie Graziano. Today's show produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical producer today, Kat Pastor. Thank you so much, Katie and Kat, for your work today. Listeners, you can download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for listening. This is Where We Live. I'm Frankie Graziano. Good day.